Good afternoon. This is Chris Gredig with AccuSystems, and I would like to welcome you to today's webinar. And Michael, are you there?
Yes, I
am. This webinar is basically a we get together with Cornerstone Advisors, and they're helping us with that webinar. And thank you to you, Michael, for lending your expertise to help the banks, the participants with tips on how to succeed in selecting new software applications.
Very welcome. It's a very important topic.
And I just want to wait just another minute or two before I dig too far into it. I think if we have a few people that are still missing, perhaps it would be appropriate. Mike, would you like to go over it's not letting me. I kind of introduce yourself just a little bit while we wait for a few more people to come in?
Sure. My name is Michael Kroll. I'm a senior director with CorStone Advisors. I've been with Cornerstone about 6 years. Prior to that, I was with a pretty large bank in South Mississippi, Hancock Bank. I was in numerous roles. I was there for 20 years. I was first in technology and software and networks, and then moved into operations, then finished out my career there as head of loan operations. So I have a good blend of operations and technology. I actually left the bank after Hurricane Katrina and decided to move off of the coast of Mississippi and moved up to Charlotte, North Carolina. And so at Cornerstone, I've focused in a number of different areas. A lot of the lending system selections come my way, a lot of the process improvements, a lot of the document imaging pieces, as well as a lot of the payments and EFT selections. So I'm very well versed in Cornerstone's selection methodology.
Terrific. Very happy to have you here. Hoping that we're able to assist in some of the participants in their selection software. Is it general applications, or is it specific ECM, enterprise content management, imaging, document management? What I would like to kind of bring up next is the agenda, and I'll let Michael start to kind of take his section out. It's going to be approximately 30 minutes, and he's going to discuss tips for evaluating new software in general. And then more specifically, he's going to discuss common mistakes that your bank should truly avoid during the evaluation process. And after that, I will basically then continue the webinar with 5 steps for guaranteeing success with an enterprise content management solution. So what I will do basically is, Michael, let you take over, and I'm going to just let you go from here. How is that?
Perfect. Okay. Cornerstone Advisors has been around for about a decade now. Have a number of different type of offerings, which allow strategic planning, technology planning. We also are well known for our Cornerstone Report, which is a biannual publication we do of benchmarking and best practices in mid-sized banks and credit unions. We just collected all of the credit union data for 2012. We're putting the report together now, and we'll begin collecting the bank data here in very short order. We also do look at system selections. It's kind of what we cut our teeth on as a consulting firm. We also help with contract negotiation and a number of other services. And we only focus on financial institutions, so the mid-sized banks and the larger credit unions. So we don't, go down to the little, $20 million banks, and we don't go up to the, $3 trillion banks. So very laser-like focus. Okay, I'm clicking and it's not advancing, Chris.
And I'm trying to get that to you, and I'm just going to manually click.
Yeah, you can just advance it. That's fine. I saw it go.
Okay, here we are.
One more.
There we go.
So, we're often asked, what's a Gonzo Banker? And Gonzo Banker is Cornerstone's alter ego. It's kind of our marketing arm. We put out a weekly newsletter That's free, that there'll be a slide for at the end where you can subscribe to. But a Gonzo Banker is really, you think of the change agents, your all-stars, your go-to people in your organization. And so, they use a lot of, facts and creativity. Their main driver is just, improving performance, making things better. They try to, avoid the political infighting, the, over-analysis that tends to cause people to stop dead in their tracks. And, he doesn't accept the answer, we've always done it that way. And so they're, Gonzo Banker's always looking for, what's possible. Knows there's going to be, obstacles and roadblocks, but, tries to get through those as best as possible. And so really, just trying to create a positive change environment inside of the organization. And every organization needs some Gonzo Bankers, especially, on the back end of a selection when you're doing an implementation. You need somebody that's going to, help drive that to success. Next slide, please.
And I'm going. Here we are.
Okay, so at Cornerstone, we always like to find the root cause of, why our clients are experiencing troubles. And so, we never just take the first answer. So, when we are approached by a client for an engagement, we always like to do some discovery and understand really what's behind it. And, sometimes they may think they need a new system, and oftentimes we find that they have a perfectly fine system. It's just the way that it was implemented or is being used or is being supported, or either really lack of support. But oftentimes, we do, get to the root of the problem and say, okay, we do need to get a new system, and that's when we get involved and help walk through the system selection process. Next slide, please. And so our methodology, it's been proven over the years. And so it consists of 6 phases overall. We're going to focus today on really just phase 1 through 4. We won't get into the conversion implementation, at least not in my part of the presentation. So we're going to talk about, the business needs assessment, which should always come first, and then the whole RFP process, then the RFP analysis and selection process, and then the 4th phase is the contract negotiation. Next slide. So the business needs assessment, or BNA as we call it for short, consists of several exercises. That the main goal is to understand the organization, the strategy, and the need for technology. And so typically, what you want to do, even if you're doing this yourself, you want to start off, with a good inventory of all the technology that's in use, because oftentimes you'll find technology that, users are very satisfied with, that you might want to keep and interface into. You'll also find technology that, users don't like, that you would like for a vendor to replace. You'll also identify some unknown technology that nobody knew existed, but you have to account for either to interface or replace the functionality. And so it's a good way of, letting the users tell you how they feel about the solutions that they work with on a daily basis. We also think that benchmarking is an appropriate thing to do on the front end of a selection, because typically one of the purposes of a technology is to make you more efficient, make you more higher productivity, and you won't know if you've succeeded with a solution unless you know where you were starting from. And so to understand what the productivity level is going in, and then measure it sometime after the implementation when the users have all gotten comfortable with it and it's working as it's supposed to ensure that you've achieved the efficiencies that you wanted to. Interviews, you can only collect, so much data through a survey, and so we always recommend, conducting some interviews with the key stakeholders. So, the business line managers for the area that is asking for the new solution. IT needs to be interviewed to understand their, technology preferences, whether they, prefer in-house, outsourced, big client, virtual, those types of things, what types of databases, and so you can't forget IT, and then users as well. And so we typically recommend, going down a level in the organization and talk to the users that are, doing the job on a day-to-day basis, and you'll find out some interesting requirements when you talk to them. And as part of those interviews, you need to really look at the major processes. So that's that business process optimization review. because typically a technology is not there in a standalone environment. It's supporting a process or two. And so you want to understand, which processes are going to be impacted when you do a conversion. Because the worst thing you can do is just implement a software package and kind of rewrite it or customize it to do exactly what the other software package was doing, or to do exactly what your broken process is doing. So there's a piece of process reengineering that should go along with every system selection and implementation. And then also Cornerstone does also have a conversion project readiness assessment, where we look at okay, what is the capacity to actually do this conversion. Most of our clients are like everybody else, and they've been trimming back and cutting back and are operating on razor thin productivity levels, so that if one or two people are out sick, you can really tell. And typically these projects takes a couple of people to work on that already have a 40-hour-a-week job. And so it's important to gauge your resources for implementation, because that's a very high risk, and you want the project to be a success. Next slide, Chris. Oh, Chris, I think we also forgot to say that if people want to chat in some questions, I think somebody's going to be capturing those, and we can address those at the end. So there should be a chat button up on your window up there to just chat in a question. We won't address them as we go through, but we'll collect them at the end.
And I will do my best, if I see them, just to mention them to you. How is that?
Okay, that's good. All right, and then from the RFP side, so after you've gone through the BNA, the Business Needs Assessment, then you should have a very good understanding of what the needs and goals are for the project. And so to translate that into an RFP, I think is more, than just a list of, do you have this, yes, no. That kind of lets the vendors off the hook too easy. Most of them will check, yes, all the way down, and you won't have a really good comparison. And so, within the RFP, we like a couple of sections in there. One is where we, describe the current, business and technology environment, so the vendor kind of knows what they're walking into and what they're responding to. It's certainly important to list all of the systems that are being used, because oftentimes, we find that our clients aren't aware that even their current vendors have additional modules that can help automate or improve existing processes. So it's important to kind of be full disclosure and tell the vendor everything that you have that's involved in that particular area or function that you're researching a new system for. And then based upon the user surveys and maybe some of the IT folks, you're going to let the vendor know in the RFP that for this system we expect an interface. So you probably want to interface to your core system. You're not going to replace it as part of a loan origination system selection or an ECM system selection. Or there may be systems that you want replaced. And so they should know what they have to come to the table with as far as a solution. And then probably the more important part of the RFP is kind of a narrative section where you'll describe some of the business issues that came up in the business needs assessment. And again, we're not saying you don't have any, can you do this, can you do that type of questions, but that shouldn't be all that's in your RFP. So your RFP should, basically frame a business issue that you have today in terms of, how does your solution solve our issue? And, make the vendor write a response. And, we're not looking for a 2-page response. Typically what we see are, a couple of sentences on, this is how our solution does that. And that gives you a much better way to compare, functionality between solutions as it relates to solving your business issues. I think that third step there is also important, is to do some research, prior to releasing the RFP, and then really look for vendors that are going to be a best fit. And certainly for any solution, you can go out and find 20 or 30 vendors that offer something to solve it, but you don't want to just cast the net that wide. Number one, it wastes a lot of time. You have vendors writing responses that you're probably not really interested in, and then your people have to read them and go through them and sort through them. And so we think it's important that you do some research to find vendors that have the same types of clients that you are. So if the vendor is only supporting Bank of America, Chase, and Wells, and you're a billion-dollar bank, you're probably not going to get a lot of attention from them. Conversely, if the vendor is a one-man shop, working out of the garage, you may not like that risk for that one. So it's important to do that due diligence prior to sending out the RFP. And then once you do put the RFP out on the street, don't shortchange the vendor's pre-response. So the vendor's going to get this document from you. It's going to be 20-page document probably. And before they write answers to it, they're probably going to want to spend an hour or two on the phone with you, and just kind of talk through some things that either weren't clear, they want some more clarification on out of the RFP, and that really helps them to provide a very custom response to you. So if you make the effort to do an RFP, you got to make the commitment to have that vendor interaction prior to getting the responses back. And then also, just as a point, you need to treat all vendors equally. So if one vendor asks for some clarifying information, maybe the number of accounts opened on a monthly basis, you need to provide that answer back to all vendors. So do a blind copy reply all to everybody, so that everybody has all the same information they're working from. That way, one vendor doesn't appear to have an unfair advantage over the others. Okay, next slide. So now if the vendors have done their part, they've completed the RFP and sent it back to you, and now it's time to do the analysis on their responses. And there's two types of analysis that you need to do on the RFP. One is financial modeling, and when you go out and ask 4 or 5 vendors for a response for a proposal and a bid, you're going to get back 4 or 5 different formats of their pricing proposal. And so it's important to create some pretty detailed financial models, so that way you can do an apples-to-apples comparison. What you don't want is just to take the bottom line number for all vendors and try and compare that, because some are going to include stuff, some are going to not include stuff. Some might have a low upfront cost but a higher maintenance cost or annual cost. Some may have a low capital outlay but charge kind of by the drink higher than other vendors. So you want to compare the proposals, look at all of the license costs, implementation costs, the maintenance costs, but also look at your transaction costs. So if it's a system where you're paying by unit or by account or by number of transactions, you want to go ahead and do some research of your own history and do a 5-year forecast of what those volume expectations are going to be. So apply some growth numbers to that. And that way you can, arrive at a 5-year cost for all proposals and really see, okay, yeah, this vendor looked good, year 1 and 2, but, 3, 4, and 5, when we expect to grow a lot, they get a lot more expensive. And so you really need to find somebody in your shop that's got some very good Excel skills and can take those proposals and kind of line them up and put them into a spreadsheet side by side. And so that's one aspect of it. The other aspect of it is the content analysis of it. So you've gone through and within the RFP, you've asked for, some features and functions, and you've also, asked those narrative questions. And then so somebody's got to, go through and analyze those and compare those side by side. That way, your selection team can, view all that in an easy sitting and, kind of make a decision for the next portion of the process. Next slide, please, Chris. And so, now that you've done the response analysis and, you've got 4 or 5 vendors that replied, you want to go ahead and narrow that down to a short list of who you want to invite on site for some demonstrations. When you think about demonstrations, it all depends upon the type of system that you're looking for. An ECM system, an ancillary system like a loan origination, you might get a half day to 3/4 of a day demo out of each vendor and see enough to kind of get through this next filter. If it's a core system or a very large system, it's probably a 2 or 3 day demonstration with a number of different topics coming in. And the goal of each one of these steps is to filter down to a vendor finalist. And so the first filter was doing the research of the vendor community and taking it from 20 to the 5 or 6 you want to send an RFP out to. The next filter was the response analysis, and taking the 5 or 6, down to 2 or 3 that you can invite in for demos. And so what we think makes a good demo for a vendor as well is that, they have a pretty detailed agenda that they each follow. And, we're not saying they have to follow it to the T, but certainly there's going to be, enough guideline there so that every vendor is presenting, about the same thing. If you just leave it up to the vendor, they're going to show you all the oohs and ahs, and maybe not show you the things that are important. So I would include in that demo, some very specific scenarios and say, okay, show us how you handle, a multi-bank environment, show us how you handle, this situation. And let that be part of the demo. And then, also as part of the demo, you want to give rating sheets to the attendees. The whole purpose of inviting the vendors in and having, people spend, a couple of days sitting through demos is to make a decision. And if you have, everybody just kind of, voting at the end, it's not a very, quantitative analysis, and it could get emotional. Somebody might be, a vendor might bring in a very, salesy and outgoing type person, and people might rate, the charisma of the presenter rather than the solutions that they're going to be operating. And so we think those rating sheets are important. I would also make sure that, every attendee reads the RFP responses for the vendors that are coming because, typically, the vendor's going to be answering questions in the RFP, and you don't want to, make them re-answer a question in the demo that they've already answered, unless, in the RFP they gave a weak response and you want to clarify it more. And so, the rating sheet should be completed, for each vendor during the demo, because, I don't know when's the last time you sat through demos, but we sit through them about every week. And, by the end of the week, the first ones and second ones are kind of running together, and it's hard to think back, well, was that in that one, or was, that feature in that other one? And so they should, complete the rating sheets, as they're going along, and keep comments as to, why they rated that particular function, the score that they did. Next slide. And so, to help make the decision, we like to use a tool that we call a vendor scorecard. And, what that does is it helps, keep the decision, objective, and, keeps the emotions out of it. And the goal of the scorecard, again, is another filter, so it's not always, the vendor with the highest scores is the winner. Again, if you've had, 3 demos, there might be, 2 that came in very close to each other that you want to do some more due diligence on. But, we break our scorecards down into these 5 criteria. So functionality, so those rating sheets that we just talked about, you would take all those and tally those up for all the attendees and come up with that vendor's, functionality score. Then you would have a vendor strength category. So, how many clients does the vendor have? Have they won a lot of deals lately? Have they lost a lot of deals lately? Are they financially stable? So those types of factors go into the vendor strength score. Also, do they have the same types of peers as clients that you are? The pricing, so going back to the financial models, if you've got a good 5-year cost model for each vendor, lay that out there side by side. The architecture, typically there's an IT section of a demonstration, where you spend 15, 20 minutes talking about the architecture of the system. Has it gone through a major rewrite just recently? Is there a major rewrite upcoming that you need to know about that would be a risk? Is it operate on the same, Microsoft SQL Server platform that you use, or is it all Oracle-based or something else? And so those are some of the architecture questions that would go into that score. And then risk. So what is the risk of going to this vendor? And so we consider risk in a couple of different ways. One would be conversion risk. Has the vendor ever converted, from the system that you're on to their system? Have they done a lot of conversions recently? Do they have good experience? Do they have their own conversion teams, or do they outsource conversions to somebody else? Do they have too many conversions going on? Maybe they've been very successful, and they've got so many conversions that they're having some quality issues. Also, risk would be support risk and operational risk. So, how big is their help desk? Are they open? The hours that you need them to be open. So those are the types of questions. And so, again, the goal of weighing these factors is to decide which vendor do we want to, walk a little bit further down the aisle with. Next slide, please. And then due diligence. So just because the vendor had a score of 100 and the other vendors had a score of 75 doesn't mean you should stop there. Typically in the RFP you're going to ask for references, and you need to keep in mind that the vendor is going to give you their best customers, their cheerleaders, and so before you call the reference, you want to have a quick call with the vendor and really discuss the reference with them. How long have they been a client? Are they on the latest version that you're going to be running? Did they belong to the user group and those types of, how active of a client are they? And, what kind of a market are they in? What types of volumes do they do? So you can kind of, compare and make sure that it's a good reference for you to call. We also think, having a template of topics that you want to cover is a good idea. Again, so that way, you're discovering the information that you want to discover, and it's not just an ad hoc conversation. Some references also like to receive that questionnaire, if you will, ahead of time so they can be prepared and have the right people on the phone. And then also, while you're having the phone call, determine if that would be a good site visit. We recommend that at least doing one site visit as you're going through a selection, depending upon the size of the product that you're looking at. We also recommend, maybe even doing a site visit to the vendor's headquarters just to see what it's like. And don't forget that you've got a bunch of peers out there. You could reach out to them and find other users that may not have been on the vendor's reference list. You can also try and find users that have recently deconverted. To Cornerstone, because we do a lot of these. We know who's going from what to what, and so we typically give our clients a couple of clients that we know have deselected the vendor that they're selecting, and those are typically good phone calls to understand why. Sometimes it's a support issue. Sometimes it's, well, we've just been on it for 20 years and we thought it was time to do something else. But those are, it's good to find one or two of those to make a phone call with. And then, as you're doing all of this due diligence, keep a list of items that you discover that are, what other clients are saying, well, we still wish it would do this. Those are functionality gaps. And you want to make sure that, before you, sign that contract, that you discuss those with the vendor and say, okay, here's some things that, we think need to be addressed, or committed to be addressed before we sign the contract. And so again, you want to have that conversation with your vendor before you sign the contract on all those items that you've discovered. Next slide, please. And then, so once you're, satisfied with your due diligence, then you get the contracts and then start the negotiation of it. So you certainly want to, make sure that the pricing that is in the contract, matches the pricing that you thought was in the proposal. Same thing on service. Sometimes the vendors are willing to, put in some service level agreements. Sometimes they're not. Sometimes, you may have thought that, this particular service was included in the contract, and it's really not. It's an optional module, but you want to make sure that the contract states clearly all of the services that you're expecting to get or buy, and the price for each. I think also looking at the contract in light of what was discovered during the due diligence, and making sure that either through an addendum or professional services agreement, that anything that is, really an obstacle or a roadblock to you is covered, with some contractual language. And the vendors are going to have a little bit of an issue because, from a revenue perspective, they can't book revenue if they're committing to software that's yet developed. And so, typically those end up being outside of the contract in the professional services agreement, but you can still, lock those down pretty good as well. And then, as you're reviewing the contract, you want to look for the business issues that are there. And, you always want to have your legal counsel look at it for the legal portion of it, but there's a number of business items that you want to make sure are covered. I'm not going to go through the whole list there, but, you want to make sure that, all the pricing is listed in there correctly, all the correct schedules are there to cover everything, the conversion, the training, your ongoing maintenance expenses, those things. And, make sure that the term is what you want it to be, as well as the renewal periods. Any of the termination penalties, who owns the custom enhancements, so if you pay for professional services to have something custom, do you own that, or can the vendor then go, resell that again to somebody else? Escrow, so, if the vendor, does go belly up, you want at least to have a copy of the code so you can manage it until, you can find a replacement if that's what you end up doing. And also, make sure that the vendor responsibilities and your responsibilities are well documented inside the contract or addendums. Next slide. And so, it's a little plug for Cornerstone here. These are all the things that we do, what I've described as part of our methodology. So, one of the benefits of having a consultant help you through it is, we keep a good pace to it, make sure that, we get you to a decision. We often go into clients who have been trying to make a decision for 2 years, and they just can't get to it because they don't have the tools or the methodology, and it becomes an emotional decision. Also, it takes some of the burden off of you. So, you have a bank to run or a credit union to run. And then also, our contract negotiation. We do a lot of contract negotiation, so, we make sure that you're getting, good pricing, market pricing, and good terms. And then, we also could assist in conversions, and we have an experienced conversion team that, helps provide, project management and conversion expertise. Next slide, please. Here's the Gonzo Newsletter, so you can go to gonzobanker.com and get your free copy. And I author under the name Kroll Dude, so if you ever see a Dear Kroll Dude Gonzo, that would be me. And I think that's all. Well, there might be one more slide for me, maybe. Nope, that's it.
So, Michael, I want to thank you for participating today and be with us. And hopefully this is helpful for some of the participants in determining RFPs, how you can help with them, etc. So again, thank you very much for helping out here. And I do believe we have a kind of two audiences. Some of them are the Cornerstone participants that you have been working with, and some of them are the participants that are here from AccuSystems. And again, welcome to all of you, and we appreciate, Michael, your time here helping us.
You're welcome.
And I'm Chris Gredick with AccuSystems, and I want to welcome you here to this presentation. And I'm not going to talk too much about myself. I'm just going to say I'm co-founder, co-president here at AccuSystems. And this is a kind of our market presence, our foot presence around the United States with financial institutions. You kind of see where we're at within this slide. And the next slide here is basically our growth from 2003 to 2012, just steady growth, organic. And then you have this little insert here that tells you where we're at with this particular product AccuAccount, where our implementations are, and we're just getting our first 10 billion bank as we speak of, so it's not going to be quite here yet. But that's a kind of our size of our banks by assets within our current customer groups, I guess. Now I want to change the table a little bit and ask, how can we help you? We want to guarantee success connecting people, systems, processes, and documents. And I thought it may be helpful to bring in a case study of a 250 million asset, in this case it's a bank, not a credit union, in the Midwest that kind of went through this process, and it may be able to help you determine an efficient path from looking, evaluating it, could be any software, specific document management, imaging applications, so that you perhaps can find a good solution at the end with that. Very similar to Cornerstone, and believe it or not, when I saw his slideshow, I was all surprised a similar slide came in, that we basically have these 5 steps for success in selecting an ECM solution. And like Michael, we really want to focus first on your needs. That's a kind of the most important part of the selection process. Why would you do that? Then once you know why, you want to define your goals a little bit. How am I going to do that? How am I going to achieve those goals that I laid out in my first step? Once you know that, and we believe only then can you start looking at vendors and really start analyzing, comparing vendors to your goals, to your needs, to the strategy that you have defined. And once, again, you may be down to one vendor, two vendors, you really need to start to manage what we call the constraints. Why would this not happen? What are the reasons this may not be happening? And you need to work on those. And then in step 5, we really want to go to the go live strategy, meaning what do we have to do to make sure that we reach our goals, our primary needs are met. It's almost coming back to the beginning. We start 1, 2, 3, 4, and the 5th is really that links all of those back together. So that's a kind of what I would like to go over, is dissecting these 5 steps for success. Primary needs, the most important aspect. We believe that on its own, a solution has no inherent value. So therefore, we must discover 3 things. What are the issues that it needs to resolve that we currently cannot? Or what better outcomes are we trying to achieve that we cannot with our current applications? That's the wish list. On the other side, we also have to somehow define specific, measurable economic benefits that that application can create for us. Is it a return investment analysis? Is it a very clear understanding on how can we find the economic benefit, not just the process improvements? At the end, a financial institution will not spend money if they cannot find an economic benefit as well. So, issues to be resolved, outcomes, and an economic benefit that makes sense. How are we going to do that? We're starting at a very high level with business objectives, issues, outcomes, where when I would go to a bank, they could be able to tell me, why would you do that? And in this case, this 250 million asset bank told us ease of use, end user experience is a number 1 that we need to have. Improving exception management, maybe, but it's really not that high. We're doing fairly well with that, but our reporting really needs some help. What about workflows? No, we're a small bank. We are okay with the workflows. The larger the banks or the credit unions, typically, the higher the focus on improving workflows that we typically see. What about efficient capture options? Are we going to be decentralized within our capture? Are we going to move them all to central location, capture there, things like that? Different for every bank. Our bank basically rated the 1s and 2s. So that's what they're saying. This is really on the high level what we want to solve. And then they decided what departments do they want to be part of this, who they want to involve in their project. They decided really the best value is with credit administration, loans, loan servicing, deposit. So they looked at accounts and said, that's what we want to focus right now. We're not going to worry about HR, vendor contracts, etc., etc. So they decided this is where we want to concentrate our efforts in finding a vendor that meets the needs that we are in the process of developing. So then now we want to create in step 2 a strategy that sizzles, that really makes sense, that can move us off the, how do I say that, the do nothing section where I'm going, this is where I bring the value in. So first of all, we want to identify the stakeholders. Then we want to, with them, review the primary needs that often come from management. And then we want to do a process impact, process improvement analysis, really go in to say, what do we have to change to accommodate those primary needs? And in this case, these are the people that the financial institution involved in accommodating that task of defining the goals. So we have credit administration, we have somebody in loan serving, we have deposit, we have a senior management, we have IT, and then we have now the senior management person that is in there. And they are kind of then went in and looked at all those high value, high important items they wanted to solve and said, how are we going to do that? How are we going to resolve to achieve our goals? So they went in and said, okay, if ease of displaying customers and accounts is really important to us, how are we going to do that? And then in this case, with our help, they came up with a list of what they felt were the drivers. They needed to have this to succeed. They come at all these items. They said, yes, we want to be able to do that. We want to track related entities. We want to share collaterals. We want to be able to perform research from other departments on customers' accounts. Those were just the kind of the list they come up with. And now they're going to step 3. Now that they have developed that list for, and I'm going back a few slides just to show you here, one list for every one of those items, number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4. They developed that list that they felt that's what they needed to succeed. And then they kind of expanded that list and said, okay, what impact will have that on our institution? And they determined what internal user experience, what impact will it have to them? High number 1, low number 3. External customers, does it have an impact on that? Displaying customers' accounts? Probably not so much. Does these improvements allow me to streamline my processes? Probably, as you can see, some of them yes, some of them not. Then they came in and said, is this a candidate to truly re-engineer the way we do our processes? As an example, when I go from paper to an imaging system, can I truly revamp my loan application underwriting approval approach? Can I, in the deposit side, cut down to 30 seconds from perhaps 2 days to get the account opened, signature cards in, and that operating or the agreement basically reviewed? Items like that. There is obviously an external customer improvement in that experience. So we really go in to say, streamlining, is it a candidate truly to re-engineer our processes? Is auditing and compliance, is it a big improvement potential for them? And then at the end, more back to this ROI, to savings. Does it create FTE savings? The items that we have basically put out there, does it or does it not? Somewhat, medium, or high? And then, is this a candidate for cost elimination? As an example, if I get a document management application with an integrated tickler, I can basically stop support on my manual tickler. I can eliminate that application. So there would be direct savings to that. So that's where we start out with step 3, where we're finding the formula for the vendor success. Once we have that, we can go to the next step, basically matching the requirements that we have defined with vendor solutions. So we basically can go in and say, now, these are items that are important to us. This is how we rate them in how they can help improve our current processes. And then we can start comparing vendors and see basically where are they at with that. And then we're running off the page, but then there is one more column where the vendor basically then with a summary statement tells you how he will do that, how he is going to accommodate that instead of just a yes, an X for yes, not available, or customization requirement. So only at this level 3 or step 3 is where we bring in the vendor. Once we have defined on a high level what is important to us, the what are we trying to solve, the how are we going about to solve them, understanding what the impact is on our processes, that's when we go in and basically start looking at vendors and comparing vendors, column features to those very real needs we have. And what we want to make sure that we do not have vendor features that perhaps are irrelevant to the success of our financial institution, but are really, really cool to look at and are really entertaining. So what we call it's inside out. We look at our needs first and then compare the vendors. Next, we go basically to step 4. Once we have defined, we have agreed on a vendor, and I think Michael has gone much more in depth, and I'm going to say much more appropriate, the way he went at it and said, you know, every stakeholder here will kind of rate the various vendors on how they feel they can solve our needs, etc. And so I'm not going into that. I'm going to go directly to manage constraints. And when a bank, a financial institution, a credit union decides, yes, we like what we see, often there are constraints that need to be solved before we can move forward. Again, there could be contracts. There could be, I don't have the necessary buy-in. My board says no. I lack resources. It's just too hard, too overwhelming. Or I just don't know if we can succeed. This application looks great. We have great references, but I do not know how to go about succeeding. The one that this bank really came out strong said, you know, I really need to justify the cost of this application. And so what I'm going to do is just go into ROI analysis and I kind of discuss that in further detail. And any of those other 5 constraints or 4 constraints are typical. We see those very often. So I'm just going to go into ROI analysis and break this down a little bit for the group here. So number 1, the return on investment analysis is designed to communicate the cost of maintaining your current system with the absence of the value created with an ECM solution that is able to meet your goals and your needs. So we really want to start out, what is the cost of the status quo? We just don't know. Before we can know the difference, we need to know what is the current cost. And here at AccuSystems, we kind of broke that down into 3 components: tangible savings, savings within processes, and intangible savings. And I'm just going to go over those a little bit. When we talk about tangible savings, those are savings that are hard dollar. We can really, truly define them. As an example, we are a paper-based system. That's what we have at our financial institution. And we're going to have 1,100 square feet where we have currently file cabinets that we can reoccupy, reuse by putting 5 users on here. And again, it's a $10 a square foot, etc. And we can come up with a savings of that. Then do we need to stop buying file cabinets? What about file folders? Things of that nature. There could be a savings from that. The time to access a document on a paper-based system, and this is just a paper-based system comparison here, what is the typical time versus me clicking on a desktop? What about travel of documents or people? Auditors, it could be compliance, it could be even examiners that could do their exams on the loan portfolio, perhaps off-site, things of that nature. So those are easily definable, tangible savings. Then we go, what are the savings within the processes we looked at? Were we creating that efficiency? Let's start with setting up a loan. What about the perfection process? The renewal. We have auditing. We have paid out, possibly charged off. We have all those processes. And I'll go more into savings within the processes. I'm going to bring some spreadsheets up on that next. But before I go there, let's talk a little bit about intangible savings. Those are possible savings that are hard to define because something has to go wrong for them to materialize. As an example, disaster prevention. If I have go back to paper documents, if I have a vault that floods, if I have a fire, that's when the cost becomes large. I have a document that is lost. That's when the cost occurs. So it's really hard for me to determine that. What about the risk of a manual tickler? If I have a manual tickler and, as an example, I do not perfect the document, I miss an insurance expiration, I may have some significant risk on that particular collateral, on that particular loan. What is that risk? We really do not know until it is too late. Once in a while, we find non-standardized document structures among the branches where, again, auditors, examiners come in and say, you're running 5 banks, not 5 branches. Everybody does it different. That is, again, where a good ECM solution can really help with accountability of those processes. So next, what I'd like to do is just go into a little bit more detail here and review here the loan setup, perfection, renewals, and obviously the spreadsheet will go on. And what we are really doing is comparing a paper-based system in this case or AccuAccount, a ECM application. Really looking into how many loans do we book a year, what is the time that is currently being spent on that process, and what is the time that we determine will be spent in the future. We do the same thing for perfection process, renewals, etc. And where at the end we really can give you a very good indication on how much your savings will be and where. How do we reduce cost to your perfection process in an ECM application? Because we eliminate the manual tickler. Nobody will type into the manual tickler after booking all the items. On a renewal, nobody will have to put in the document came in, I need to set up the tickler for the next year. All of those items. So that is just an example where we simply eliminate manual processes. This application, AccuAccount, has a scheduler that automatically schedules new documents, ticklers on its own at a predetermined time. Again, we literally take non-value added processes out of the system. So that is the savings within, just showing you that. And if I would take, again, this sample financial institution where they had 10 FTEs, the bottom line is they're spending 14,000 hours right now. If they believe they will spend 10,000 hours later, what is the savings? $54,000. What is the cost? At the end, what is their ROI, return of investment? Again, different for every bank, but again, it starts out with what are you trying to solve. Next, I would like to go into step 5 here, which is, again, probably the second most important step after the definition of what you're trying to accomplish, and is how do we make sure that what we're trying to implement is really going to happen? How do we need to set up the document structures, the exception definitions, the reporting services to make sure we reach our goal? What about the hardware, software installation? What about the data mappings to the core, imports? What about integrating to multiple other applications? Is it a Doc Prep, a Laser Pro, a Wolters Kluwer? Is it a credit analysis package that I need to bring in ratios, that I need to bring in data or documents? And then, of course, the configuration of the desired workflows. Again, who is receiving what email, in what case, etc., etc. And then typical, do we have an image conversion or do we have a backlog paper conversion? Currently, our firm is doing probably about 13 image conversions as we speak today. Just to say an example, and probably we have about 10 banks that are currently somewhere in the backlog imaging, where they're basically are scanning in their paper files. And then, of course, the training. The training not only up front, but as important, in 4 years, if I have a new person in that bank, how can I make sure that person gets properly trained? So again, training, big part of that success of our system. And next, so we've kind of gone to the 5 steps here. We have about 3 minutes left. I want to thank you for your time. And if you would like to get a copy of this presentation, or if you would like help with guaranteeing success, connecting people, systems, processes, please email me, chrisg@accusystem.net. We also have a workbook that basically goes into all the worksheets that were used here today from ROI, all of those that you're welcome to utilize and change them as you need to guarantee the success for you. Please just email me and I'll gladly send it out, or also for the participants that have contact with us, if you just talk to Ginger, to Sharon, to Nicole, or anybody else here, please let them know and we'll send it out to you. Here's just some more information about us and how to get more information from us. Any questions from anybody at this time? And Michael, anything that you have that you want to summarize or go over with?
No, but those are both 2 good presentations, and hopefully the audience took away some good tidbits out of that.
And just going into questions, and I do apologize, some questions came in earlier. I was focusing on my presentation here. Several people asking how they can get a copy of this presentation. And again, I do believe if we have financial institutions that are working with Cornerstone, with Michael, you're more than willing to get a copy and send this out. Is that correct, Michael?
Oh, yes. Yeah.
And also, so there are 2 items here. One of them is a copy of what you have seen today. You can get that. One of them is our internal document to guarantee success. That's more in detail with the worksheet, with the ROI. Let us know what you would like, both or one or the other, and we help with that.